I cannot but respect, and I mean this without irony, the brutal honesty of the first generation founders of the State of Israel. How differently they were talking, all of them, that is to say, the early Moshe Dayan, and so on, from today's Israeli establishment. I mean, the way to point out to today's Israel the weak points of their politics is not to criticize them from some abstract position, but simply to remind them what their ancestors were, and not by ancestor, I don't mean the Bible, I mean simply 2 generations earlier, first generation Israeli politicians, they were aware of it. I mean, it's interestingly to read their statements where they clearly say, it's not a question of justice. We are here, we took somebody else's land, maybe we have some right, they also have the right, and it's simply a matter of war, who will take it. I like this attitude, it's at least honest, it openly says with none of this bullshit, and I noticed this bullshit. The nicest example of je sais bien, mais quand même, and among atheist Israelis, this is a standard joke, is how, because do you know that Israel, this renders the country rather sympathetic to me, you know that Israel is the most atheist country in the world. It's about 60%, they are atheists. But there, je sais bien, mais quand même is, there is no God, but nonetheless God gave us the land of Israel. That's basically it. Okay, so look, a wonderful model of how honestly they put it. On 29th of April 1956, a group of Palestinians from Gaza crossed the border to plunder the harvest in the Nahal Oz kibbutz fields, just across. Then there was Roy, a young Jewish member of the kibbutz who patrolled the fields. He tried to chase them away with a stick. He was seized by the Palestinians, carried back to the Gaza Strip, and when the next day the Palestinians gave the body to United Nations forces to return it to the Israel, his eyes had been plucked out. Moshe Dayan, then the chief of staff, delivered the eulogy at his funeral the following day. Listen to this carefully. Let us not cast blame on the murderers today. What claim do we have against their mortal hatred of us? They have lived in the refugee camps of Gaza for the past 8 years, while right before their eyes we have transformed the land and villages where they and their ancestors once lived into our own inheritance. We have transformed. So you see the honesty. It's no bullshitting. It's, we took the land from there, of course they hate us. Moshe Dayan says it. But now comes the mystery, the second paragraph. It is not among the Arabs of Gaza, but in our own midst that we must seek Roy's blood. How have we shut our eyes and refused to look squarely at our fate and see the destiny of our generation in all its brutality? Have we forgotten that this group of young people living in Nahal Oz bears the burden of Gaza's gates on its shoulders? Obvious reference to Samson, the gates of Gaza, and so on. But what's so interesting here is that you see how Dayan is reasoning. In the first paragraph, he openly admits that the Palestinians have at least some kind of right to hate the Israeli Jews since the Jews took their land. His conclusion, however, is not the obvious admission of one's own guilt, but to fully accept what he calls the destiny of our generation in all its brutality. That is to say, to assume the burden, not guilt, but burden of the war where might will be right, where the stronger will win. The war was not about principles of justice, it was precisely an exercise in what Walter Benjamin called the mythic violence. I think if Israel were to return a little bit to this, I'm not saying Israel should say in some stupid, politically correct pro-Palestinian way, sorry that we exist, we move to Europe and so on, but fundamentally, has to put it, fully admit the deadlock. That they don't have the right to simply play in the eyes of Palestinians the good guy. Things would have maybe changed. Okay, many things also have to change among the Palestinians. I totally agree. Consequently, I claim, the I will make now a crazy proposal. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict also, this old motto from the 1968, the Walls of Paris, soyons réalistes, demandons l'impossible. Let's be realists, let's demand the impossible holds. If there is a lesson to be learned from the endlessly protracted Middle East negotiations, it is that I claim the main obstacle to peace is precisely what is offered as a realistic solution, the two separate states. Although none of the two sides really want this solution. Israel would probably prefer a little bit of West Bank that it is ready to seek to become a part of Jordan. And the Palestinians also consider the pre-67 Israel part of their land. So first, let's be clear, nobody really wants the two states. But nonetheless, it is somehow accepted by all of us as the only feasible solution. What both sides exclude as an impossible dream is the simplest and most obvious solution. A binational secular state comprising all of Israel plus the occupied territories and Gaza. Now you will say, I know what you will say, I'm crazy utopian. It's a utopian dream disqualified by the long history of hatred and violence. Here I think I have a perfect answer. It's not utopia, it's a reality. Isn't de facto the reality of today's Israel and occupied territories that it de facto is a binational state? It is one state. Israel is de facto in control of it. It's controlled by one sovereign power, the state of Israel, which is then divided by internal borders. So that I claim the task should rather be to abolish the apartheid and transform all of it simply to accept it. It is one state. And I'm seriously advocating it. It may surprise you, but what was for a long time a shocking idea is even accepted more and more by some still marginal parts there. You know why? Because this is the easiest solution even for the West Bank settlers. Nobody has to leave West Bank. It's just that you accept what is de facto, one big Israel as a reality, of course, with the proviso of making it de facto secular and so on and so on. Now we'll say it's still madness. Maybe it's it, but then I claim we will not have a solution. It's as simple as that. Okay, let me go on with this idea of humanist, no humanist, just this reduction to, but we are human as the form of ideology. Now, I may disappoint some of you, but I would like to begin with, to conclude with the opposite example from today's Cuba. If you want to read one of the most interesting detective writers today, it's Leonardo Padura Fuentes, a Cuban writer who does police procedurals set in today's Havana. His detective hero is an Inspector Mario Conde. And you know, the portrait of Cuba that you get is very realistic. I mean, it's not some idealized socialist Cuba. It's prostitution, poverty, the arrogance of ruling nomenclatura, and so on, even hunger, crime, prostitution. Again, so first I thought, oh my God, this guy must have a nice villa in the suburbs of Miami or whatever. Then I was surprised to learn that not only he lives in Havana, but he is no dissident there. He is their big star, recognized and so on. And then I got it. This is it's a kind of a zero-level defense of today's Cuba. The message is, of course, revolution is screwed up. Of course, it's a misery. We are a lost generation. But nonetheless, and this has nothing to do with politics. It's simple, ethical consistency. We must heroically accept what we are, not to escape into the dreams of Miami or whatever, but just with dignity to accept our reality, our love for this country, and to go on living here. I think it's a very desperate strategy, but much more effective than official propaganda. You see, this also is, for me, ideology. Now, a next, more complex step. What we get in this reduction of humans, not to ideological categories, but to concrete human beings, is this what Christians call the love of a neighbor? Does this mean, no, don't treat the other as some abstract category